महका को मयसर नहीं रोती, उस खेत के हर खोशाए गंदम को जला दो। उठो मेरी दुनिया के गरीबों को जगा दो, उठो मेरी दुनिया के गरीबों को जगा दो, उठो मेरी दुनिया के गरीबों को जगा दो, उठो मेरी दुनिया के गरीबों को जगा दो।
उठो मेरी दुनिया के गरीबों को जगा दो. These are the words that we open this May Day with. It's been the most harrowing time for so many of us, and not just us, but for the whole country, and in particular for the poor of this country. I don't need to say what that means. Everyone, this whole country seems to be gasping. It seems to be gasping not just for oxygen, but it seems to be gasping for a change. Actually, it seems to me that this country and the whole world is gasping for socialism. It's been a tradition with the May Day bookstore, with Leftward Books, with Vam Prakashan, every year to mark the 1st of May, the International Workers' Day, with a celebration of workers' rights. And for the first 8-9 years, we held the event at the May Day bookstore. Now, last year, we weren't able to hold it at the bookstore. We held it online, and it turned out to be a 13-hour marathon that we held online. This year, we're bringing you 7 hours of programming, starting now at 4 o'clock and going on. The last session, the last event is going to be Rahul Ram and Sanjay Rajora of Aisi Taisi Democracy. They'll take the stage at 10 p.m. and go on till 11 p.m. So in all, we are going to have 7 hours of programming. Before we get going with the first session of the day, I'd like to invite my colleague and my comrade Winnie to share with us her thoughts on this day. You're muted, Winnie.
Thank you, Sudanva. Thank you for joining us. May Day greetings to all of you. Like Sudanva said, we all are living through the darkest hours of humanity, and the only hope that we see is a hope of working class unity. As our Haymarket martyr, our hero Augustus Spy said, if you tread upon a spark, but there and behind you and in front of you and everywhere, flames will blaze up. It's a fire you cannot put out. In these times when private individuals aim for super profits, potentially charging the poorest people in the world with the highest prices of vaccines, we see auto drivers like Ravi from Ranchi offering free rides to people, and Wasim Gases at Shaheen Bagh offering free oxygen cylinders. We see 18-year-olds verifying medical resources which are not available, and we see farmers who are still strong at our morchas fighting for revocation of farm laws against state repression and the pandemic. It's only working class unity that will make possible a more just world than the one we live in. So with that, we would like to start our program. Qawmi Ekta Zindabad, Kisan Mazdoor Ekta Zindabad, Lal Salam. I would request my colleague and our Hindi editor, Sanjay Kunjanji, to speak now.
आप सबको वाम प्रकाशन की ओर से मई दिवस की शुभकामनाएं। आज हम एक बहुत ही भयावह दौर से गुजर रहे हैं। यह अवसर निश्चय ही उत्सव मनाने का नहीं है, लेकिन मई दिवस एक ऐसा अवसर है जब हम आज की चुनौतियों पर विचार करें, उस पर सोचें और उनसे लड़ने की नीति बनाएं और तमाम जनपक्षधर ताकतों के साथ अपनी भागीदारी सुनिश्चित करें। मई दिवस आज के इस भयावह दौर में हमें एक हौसला भी देता है। यह हौसला देता है कि जिस तरह वर्षों पहले मेहनत कश तबके ने एक लड़ाई जीती थी, उसी तरह मेहनत कश तबका आगे भी अपनी लड़ाइयां जीतेगा और आज जो चुनौतियां मानवता के सामने हैं, उससे वह लड़कर एक नई राह भी बनाएगा। हम इसी उम्मीद के साथ आज यह कार्यक्रम कर रहे हैं। अब मैं अपनी सहयोगी पूर्वाशा सरकार से अनुरोध करूंगा कि वो अपनी बात रखें। पूर्वाशा।
नमस्ते दोस्तों, मैं पूर्वाशा। शुरू में आप सबको मई दिवस के शुभकामनाएं। जैसे कि मेरे बाकी दोस्तों बोले कि हम सच में ही एक बहुत खराब और समय से गुजर रहे हैं। इस मई दिवस में मैं एक ही चीज़ बोलूँगी कि श्रमिक से लेके जो गरीब मेहनती इंसान है, जो इस मई दिवस के दिन में लड़ाई करके, जंग लड़के अपने अधिकार को छीने थे, आज उसी अधिकार को उससे हाथ से छीने जा रहे हैं। तो इस मई दिवस के अवसर पे आइए हम लोग ये दावा करते हैं कि हमारे ये जो लड़ाई है, हम जारी रखते हैं, हम लोगों से जुड़ते हैं, हम दूसरे को समझते हैं। मैं मेरे कोलीग विजय प्रसाद को इनवाइट करूंगी कुछ बोलने के लिए।
Sudhanva began this very well, and Vinny, Sanjay, and Purvasha continued it in strength. That India is, like many parts of the world, gasping for oxygen, gasping for sanity. Also, as Sudhanva put it, gasping for socialism. May Day is the International Day of the Working Class, begins out of the fight in Chicago, Illinois, in the United States for the 8-hour day, was established in 1890 as the International Workers' Day, was first celebrated in India, in Chennai in 1923, led by our comrade Singravelu, who had created in 1918 a front for labor inspired by the October Revolution of 1917. India has had an unbroken May Day celebration since 1923. We will, on the 100th anniversary of Singravelu's accomplishment, bringing May Day to India, we'll do something very special from Leftward Books and Vam Prakashan. I want to turn attention briefly to 1930. In 1930, the communist movement around the world declared that May Day would be called, for that day itself, International Unemployment Day. And the slogan was starve or fight. We're back to that situation, starve or fight. We're back to the International Unemployment Day, where half the human population, because of COVID, but also because of capitalism, is struggling with hunger. Our first panel, the opening of our day of discussing emergencies, one after the other, cascading emergencies. Our first panel will be a very important conversation between two people who I deeply admire, who both work at two different important projects. We'll have Pranjal from NewsClick, that is one of the most important news portals in India. Pranjal edited for Leftward Book, a tremendous book on the farmers' revolt. Pranjal will be in conversation for the next 50 odd minutes with P. Sainath, legendary P. Sainath of the People's Archive of Rural India. It's two legends, actually. Pranjal, legend. Sainath, legend. Welcome to Leftward Books. Welcome to Vam Prakashan. Welcome to May Day.
Thank you, Vijay, for the kind words that you have said. But I mean, since Sainath is here, I think the word legend would not suit me. I welcome you all on behalf of the Mayday Bookstore and the Leftward Books on for this panel discussion that we are doing on the topic Crisis of Our Times, and we are joined by none other than P. Sainath, the founder editor of People's Archive of Rural India. Now, when we talk about the crisis of our times, it's not something which can be covered either in one discussion, or it's not something which revolves around one specific topic. Of course, right now we are dealing with the biggest crisis, which is the health crisis in India and all across the globe, but we are also witnessing agrarian crisis. We see that economy is in shambles and nobody seems to be talking about it. We have deep polarization in the society that we need to tackle, we need to talk about. So we will discuss all these issues, but before we move forward, I would like to extend greetings to all the workers of the world on the May Day, and especially those frontline workers, doctors, nurses, safai karmcharis, farmers, gig workers who are working day and night to tackle this pandemic. So welcome, Sainath, to this discussion. So, as I said, that we we've seen various general strikes in India in last few years. We have seen farmers' protests, which is still going on, and all these strikes, farmers' protests, or different movements that have taken place. People have set aside their caste, gender, geographical differences, and have come forward to raise various demands. But we are also witnessing a deep polarization in the society. So, keeping that in mind, could you shed some light on the history of the history of the working class movement in India, and how does the working class movement, so as per se any such movement, deal with these differences, and how are they tackling the communal polarization that is happening?
Pranjal, I think May Day is a good International Workers' Day is a good time to talk about some of the historic examples. Now, we know that in the south of India, the state the state that has seen the worst communal polarization, the polarization you're talking about, the nastiness of the entire milieu that you're talking about, is Karnataka. In the last decade and a half, it has seen some terrible stuff. It is, by the way, the state at the cutting edge of anti-cow slaughter legislation, going way beyond what the laws in UP say, for instance. But it is also in this state that the Indian working class created something so special, now on its way to extinction because of a combination of corporate takeover of Indian industry and the communal acceptance of communal polarization by large sections of the elite, major sections of the elite. And that was the Kolar gold fields. I just want to tell you one little anecdote about the KGF town, which is a very, very diverse cultural town. I mean, there are people from Mangalore and Goa, but there are mostly people from Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Andhra, Telangana, and Kerala. The working class and a mainly Dalit workforce, the mines of Kolar Goldfield are more than 100. The exploration of them begins in the time of Tipu Sultan. But from the 1920s and 30s, there are major worker revolts and rebellions when they tried to first force all of them to fingerprint. Many of these people were literally slaves. They had to carry a bracelet, John Taylor and Company, announcing, so to speak, saying that they were the property of John Taylor and Company, the British gang that owned the mines. You couldn't take off that bracelet. Yeah. So even if you ran away, you were stuck with that bracelet. From the 30s onwards, you have major struggles, strikes. In the 40s, you have a very major struggle led by the Communist Party of the time. And the, these are workers who literally several days in the week never saw the sun. They went into the mines before sunrise. They came out long after sunset, and they worked, you know, 5 days, 6 days, even all days a week sometimes. Yet, the funny thing, which you will not see, I don't know if you'll see this in any other part of the country. If you go there, even today, you will see Krishna Prasad, a Hindu, has a certificate that he is the son of David Winston Benjamin, a Christian, or where Harry Walter is recorded as the offspring of Anbalagan, where Pir Muhammad is the son of Peter Gabriel, where classic Tamil epic names found in Telugu homes. How did this come about? And this is, by the way, a post-independence phenomenon. In public sector companies, which are, as you know, being slaughtered a dozen a day, in public sector companies, when there is a tradition in many public sector companies, especially in mining and areas like that, that when someone retires, another member of his or her family is entitled to a job in the mines. So what happens was that you had Hindus, Muslims, Christians. What happens when if the retiring worker does not have a son, or the retiring worker has a son doing quite well in Bangalore, thank you. The retiring worker then turns to the community and lends his name as father of his neighbor's son, so that that boy will get a job. Okay, it's just phenomenal, the kind of, so really you're entering, you Harry Winston Benjamin, a Christian, are entering there as the son of a Hindu. And it's very widespread. It's not one or two. I have looked at the muster rolls, the employment books of. Here is a working class community that created the most secular, egalitarian, multicultural space where you looked out for your neighbor. Yeah. So you were always there for your neighbor, and that's been going on for decades. It's also important look to understand how poor these people were, what sections of the working class. Pranjal, up to the 1960s, the annual increment was 5 paisa. 5 paisa a year was the damn annual increment. Here are these people who, by their struggles, changed not just their own condition, but the condition of their world. So you have a phenomenal, and what do you think is their major celebration? Here there are devout Muslims, there are Christians, many Christians, a lot of Hindus. Okay. The biggest festival they celebrate longest in the year is not Christmas, not Diwali, not New Year. It is May Day. At least it was up to early 2000. Then, of course, the state steps in, crashes these, because the idea is to flog off these mines, saying they are not profitable. They contributed some billions of rupees in revenue over 40 years to the Indian state. But May Day, and I think of them, the working class. And by the way, historically, it's the working class of Mumbai that came out for freedom of expression, that took to the streets and lost 22 lives when defending Bal Gangadhar Tilak. Like the workers of Kolkata did when Ashutosh Mukherjee, who later became the first VC of Calcutta University, also was arrested. So there's a tremendous link between May Day, the working class, and the many emergencies we are now seeing.
So, Sainath, you've raised an interesting point about how in early 2000 and later the state came into being. I mean, the state crashed these movements. And then because, I mean, the entire aim was to privatize these gold fields because public sector undertakings were not working, or the gold fields. So when we are talking about privatization, what we are witnessing is also a kind of health emergency, and the way health infrastructure has been privatized in recent years, people are on roads seeking oxygen, people are dying, and our attorney general is saying in the court that there's no lack of oxygen in hospitals or in any city. So could you let's just talk about this, that what is happening when we are witnessing what we are witnessing right now vis-a-vis COVID. Uh, there are no ventilators. Every time you check in Delhi, you see at max 10 or 12 ICU beds vacant. This is what is happening.
Well, for one thing, I want to uh, pick up from where you said about, you know, the public sector companies not doing well being privatized. Pranjal, it's the profit making public sector companies that are being privatized. Yeah, from the time we embarked on what we humorously call the economic reforms or the new economic policies, like a VSNL with 3,600 crores in cash in its account was given over to the Tatas for 1,800 crores, a gift of 1,800 crores in cash, plus scores of properties in prime localities all around. You're in Delhi, Pranjal, next to the Golda Khana is the now the Tata, uh, the Tata Communications Center. That was VSNL. You just look at the how many hundreds, well over 100 crores worth of property right there. All the companies that are being privatized are being, many of them are seriously profit making. Some of them were loss making companies in the private sector that were taken over by the public sector to save jobs, nursed back to good health, and are now being flogged off. Now you look at the oxygen crisis. Uh, by the way, who are the people? It is the public sector companies that are providing the maximum oxygen. On the other hand, you look at the vaccine shortages. You are just letting two private set the terms, whatever they want to do, whatever price, and then greatly condescend to give you a 100 rupee discount. What you're selling at 150 to the center, you're selling at 400 to the states, and then make a show of discounting the price. There is a Hafakain Institute which only now has been given permission to start doing something on vaccines. You have a tremendous capacity. You are the largest manufacturer of vaccines in the world. You have a tremendous capacity in the public sector to do this. And by the way, again, the policy links. Those of us who go back to 1991, 93, when we fought against India's accession to the WTO, we predicted this. It happened with the anti-AIDS drug of Burroughs Wellcome. It's happening now with vaccines, that the intellectual property rights rules that we were accepting in the Dunkel draft and subsequently the WTO protocols, what we did, now look, the Western countries, countries are willing to create emergencies to suppress human rights, to suppress civil liberties, but not intellectual property rights, because that would hurt capitalism, right? So you're not willing to discuss. No one is willing to say, okay, we are suspending the rights of the vaccine. The US is under tremendous worldwide pressure to do so, but is not doing so. Maybe they'll do it when it's meaningless, or
And,
when a million
and
million more
especially
people have died.
and especially when there's Section 92 in the Patents Act, which provides for the clause there
Yeah,
where every public sector undertaking can be given a option to manufacture those vaccines. But the whole focus is on making super profits.
correct. And two things. One is that the latest Forbes, which shows us that India has gone up from 102 to 140 billionaires, show us that 24 of our 140 billionaires are in the so-called healthcare sector. And the top 10 of those billionaires, the top 10 of our healthcare sector billionaires, added wealth at the rate of 5 billion rupees a day for 12 months. But Pranjal, it's not just oxygen that has an emergency. I think there is a serious systematic draining of oxygen from Indian democracy. And that is also an emergency we need to be looking at. The health emergency is devastating, uh, absolutely so. But there are multiple other emergencies, and the health emergency they're also going to be discussing with other panels this evening. Yeah.
Right. And when you're talking about this lack of oxygen within the system, as the media has been advised that the government should not be held accountable, but the system should be held accountable, we see that there's a lack of accountability. The chief secretary of Bihar has died. There are three MLAs in uh, Uttar Pradesh who have died because lack of these facilities. But still, there's no accountability that we are witnessing from the government, and the crackdown continues. Fortunately, the Supreme Court intervened yesterday, saying that if people are asking for help on social media, you can't put them into jail. But what is happening in Uttar Pradesh, and recently a wire journalist Arfa was there was an FIR filed on her because she asked for some help on Twitter. So this is another kind of emergency or the crisis that we are witnessing right now.
Well, you know the let's go back to the original emergency of 1975 for a moment. Hmm? Every year, and this year too, every year, June 25th, we hold a ritual remembrance of the political emergency of 1975-77, which was a terrible period. Yeah, but each June 25th, we make uh, we ritualize our remembrance of the emergency on a single day in the year, June 25th. But every day of the year, we institutionalize different aspects of that emergency till we've gone far beyond it in many laws, in many aspects. We've gone way beyond it. Yeah. So you've had many POTA, UAPA, WANA, NSA, you name it. The number of laws that we have brought in, we've institutionalized what were the excesses of the emergency. So that's one thing that's very serious. The other thing is that if you look at the health crisis, it also is so closely linked to the hunger crisis that you're facing. Hmm? Even before the pandemic, you had a paper in the journal Food Policy by Kalyani Raghunathan and others, which shows you, I'm talking about 2019 paper, which is pre-pandemic. Hmm? Uh, Even if rural Indians spent 100% of their income on food, which is nonsense because you got to spend on your house rent, commuting, transportation, health, education. But let's say they don't spend on anything of that. If they spent 100% of their income on food, 63% of them cannot afford a basically nutritious um, 76 I mean 76% of them cannot afford a basically nutritious meal. Let's say one third of the money is spent on non thing, then that figure goes up. So you have something, sorry, I'm so sorry, 63%. If 100% you spent your money on food, 63% can't afford it. If one third of the income was spent on food, you know it would be still a huge number of people who can't, an even larger number of people who can't afford it, 76%. So you have a food emergency at a time, and this paper, I was reading these figures last August when there were 104 million tons of food grain. Yeah. And you say 2 months we're going to give 5 kilograms. What the heck is 5 kilograms for working people? How fast that would disappear.
So that's an interesting point you are raising, Sainath. And here let's draw in parallels and solidarities that we see emerging. So recently, the 10 central trade unions have released a list of demands for the migrant workers and in general, and they're asking for 10 kg of food grains per individual for next 6 months. That is happening on one hand. On the other hand, farmers organizations and trade unions are celebrating May Day together today. And on the other hand, we are also witnessing a massive farmers movement that is going on. So with these three new laws that are going that have been implemented and government not blinking on it, do we see that this hunger emergency is going to get deepened? It's going to become a bigger crisis in coming future?
It has deepened. It's deepened very rapidly. Hmm. And it's going to get right now in People's Archive of Rural India. We are planning to focus on the districts of Beed and Osmanabad, you know, also districts of major farmer distress, farm suicides, and which have seen drought 4 out of the last 5 years, and water scarcity, more correctly speaking, than drought. Now, COVID 19 has reached the villages there. Yeah. How do people cope? What happens to those women who have to collect water and there is no water? Now, when you're working in the fields or whatever, how do you maintain social distancing? How do you do these things? Yeah. In fact, by the way, talking about hunger increasing, at the height of the hunger crisis last year, I mean, by mid-April, when we knew that the chaos was spreading last year, the one decision the cabinet took was saying, yes, you can convert any number of tons of rice into ethanol to create hand sanitizer. Yeah. So you bet. I mean, that's the kind of mentality, that's the kind of attitude. Yeah. And you're going to see this. Now, about the farmers and the workers coming together today, I think this phenomenon has been on for some time. I remember, uh, a march of farmers in Andhra Pradesh, and then the historic Nashik Mumbai march of 40,000 of some of India's poorest peasants. You know,
And
mean,
there was a big march in Delhi of around 1 lakh workers, farmers,
yeah,
workers
later. But
later.
the very important thing, both in the Nashik Mumbai march and in Delhi, was the major participation of workers' unions. In Mumbai, it wasn't even organized. We took the signal from Mumbai that it could be organized. The bankers, bank unions, insurance unions, various little unions, middle class and working class unions came out there in support of these 40,000 farmers. Something was happening, a bonding was on already. And in 36 years in Mumbai at that time, it was the first time I saw that kind of solidarity in the period of post new economic reform period. So yes, I think that's a very major and very significant thing. And November 26th last year also we had the working class calling for the acceptance of the farmers' demands. Now what will happen? I think my hinges may be slightly on what happens tomorrow in the counting of the results. But you know, I get appeals from various well-meaning liberals and others. Sainath, shouldn't the farmers go back home? It's very dangerous. I would love for them to go back home. And I'm saying it's so damn simple to send them home. Withdraw those three stupid laws. You didn't have them for 70 odd years. You can put them off for another 3 years and make them an election issue next time. Right? So it's quite simple to send them home, but there is a viciousness, a cruel, sadistic viciousness that says, let them suffer. Let them
And,
suffer.
and then a parallel campaign going on in social media and WhatsApp blaming the same set of farmers for the crisis, COVID crisis that we are witnessing right now. And it's very rampant if you look at social media. The entire blame right now is being shifted on them while we don't have any news about any kind of COVID outbreak on those protest sites.
There is no, yeah, there, the farmers didn't organize the Kumbh Mela. Hmm? They didn't do that. They didn't, unlike the prime minister of the country, go to Bengal and boast about the size of crowds that he was getting and say, never have such big audiences come out for the crowds here. Now, the farmers didn't do that. They kept to themselves and they were also, you know, fenced off like a gulag over there in governance. So I think that is so blatantly mischievous and vicious, but it's also patently, visibly untrue. Yeah, they are the ones at the greatest risk. You know, if you cannot do that much for your people, you say, okay, I won't implement this for 3 years, let the next election, or just withdraw them. What does this country lose if you withdraw them? I know who loses. If I was talking to you about the Forbes list, do you know that Mr. Ambani and Mr. Adani, yeah, uh, together, just the top two billionaires who are richer than the next three in the list, hmm, the top two billionaires in the Forbes list, Ambani and Adani, together, their wealth is greater than the GDP or GSDP of either Punjab or Haryana. Mr. Ambani's personal wealth is 84.5 billion. The gross state domestic product of Punjab is 85.5 billion, or 1 billion, which he will cover the gap in the next few weeks. Okay. Now, Mr. Adani is, some 45.8 billion, 48.5 billion. Now, if you look, who are they pitted against? They're pitted against the farmers everywhere in the country and primarily visibly against those of Punjab and Haryana. Do you know that Ambani added to his wealth at the rate last year in 12 months when such misery and suffering happened in this country? He added wealth at the rate of 1.13 lakhs per second,
Okay.
not per month, day, week, or minute, per second. Now, that 1.13 lakhs is more than the average monthly income of 6 Punjab farm households. Okay. So, I mean, this is the kind of your emergency, your biggest emergency, Pranjal, are the structural inequalities of this country that COVID has laid bare in a cruel, unsparing, and brilliant autopsy. The corpse is on the table.
And when we are talking about this, we also, there's a big section of workers, primarily the migrant workers, who are not accounted for. Trade unions are there. They have been trying to have footprints in this sector. Mostly they're looking after the organized sector. But the migrant worker, nobody seems to be talking about. And last year, I remember the government said in the Supreme Court that you won't find any migrant worker on the street while the roads, buses, trains were full of them. Hundreds of people died on the roads. So I would like to talk about this specific crisis, the crisis of the migrant workers, and it's a very interesting article that Pari has published today. That it's been a hard day's night, where you're talking about Maharashtra's Gondia district, where women travel to nearby villages to earn a daily wage. So can you throw
Yeah.
some light on this?
The peculiarity of those women is that they are urban women migrating into rural areas, commuting migration it is. Okay. They go in the, they get up at 4 a.m. They go into, because once upon a time, Gondia was thriving with the BD industry. BD is a footloose industry. The great, our, I think our Praful Patel's father, etc., all these people who, if they get 5 rupees, if they save 5 rupees per ton on labor in Chhattisgarh, then that will move there. So as these move to other places for cheaper, to Chhattisgarh, etc., the BD workers of Gondia collapsed. Their lives collapsed. Their universe collapsed. Most of them were women doing it at home. So now I accompanied them. They get up at 4 a.m., finish all the cooking. 6 a.m., they walk so many kilometers to the railway station, get onto the train, travel. They've already walked 5-6 kilometers. They travel 76-80 kilometers from Tiroda, which is a urban town, a tehsil headquarters, and they go to a villages in rural Nagpur, 80 kilometers away. From there, they walk to the fields of the landowners, another 4-5 kilometers from the station, work there, come back. Now, they have traveled 180, 170 kilometers in the day when they're back, and they're back at midnight. Pranjal, babies don't recognize their mothers. Babies that are less than 6 months old don't recognize their mothers when they come home. That's what the mothers told me on the train. So it is extreme hardship. Nobody looks at this migrant worker. Now, I think also that we all ought to accept our own hypocrisy and insensitivity, that we are looking at migrant workers. I'm not talking about the progressives, but society as a whole. We are looking at migrant workers as a group after the so-called reverse migration of last year, when millions of people walked back to took trains, etc. And people saying, well, the Solicitor General talking that in the court, in the next month after he spoke, the railways ferried 91 lakhs by their own publication. Their own published figure was in 1 month, 26 days, 91 lakh people moved on the trains. By that time, already before the train started, millions had already moved. Now, at all times in that process, the media, social media, anti-social media, which it really is, the so-called mainstream media, which is corporate media, kept asking the wrong question. Oh, why are they leaving? Why are they leaving and going home? One, I think that the decision of the workers to go back to their villages was entirely rational and correct. It is what I would have done in their place. They knew that the middle classes are not going to look after them in this crisis. They knew that their employers don't give, a farthing on what happens to them. So they knew, and they told us, they told Pari, they told NewsClick, if we are to die, better to die surrounded by our loved ones than strangers on the streets of Mumbai. But here's another thing. The wrong question was, why are they leaving? The right question was, why did they leave their villages in the first place to come here? And the answer to that was 2 words: agrarian crisis. The 2011 census, Pranjal, shows us long before your pandemic, a decade before your pandemic almost, the 2011 census shows us the greatest migrations in Indian history with a URGD, that is urban rural growth differential. Demographers use that as a proxy for migration. Okay. And the URGD was at its highest in 40 years. And the number of people who'd moved was greater than the number recorded in the first census after partition. Yeah, but we were all talking about growth 8%, growth 9%. The census was telling us, when I published that on the front page of the Hindu, some of you are our great friends in the think tanks of Delhi wrote about this alarmist exaggeration of migrations. Okay, they actually did. You can go back to the newspapers of that time. Why did those people leave the villages and come here? Because of an anti-farmer, a pro-corporate policy, which has enriched the Ambanis and Adanis and Birlas and Tatas, which drove them out as we destroyed employment in the rural areas, not just farming, but all allied occupations. 400 million people plus are considered migrants. Now, what many people don't understand is that there are different classes of migrants. Okay. Now, I am a migrant, Pranjal. I have shifted twice my father came from Kakinada to Chennai. He's a migrant. I'm a first generation urbanite born and brought up in Chennai. I then shifted to Delhi to JNU, and from JNU to Mumbai. Each shift I made a migration. I prospered and benefited because I had social capital, resources, skill capital, and all these things. Millions and tens of millions of Indian migrants do not have any such capital. Each move they make makes their lives harder, makes their lives tougher. So we never bothered about this level of migrations. And then it suddenly blew up in our face when they all started going back. Now, about the second, if you look at the second wave of migrants, also, many of them are people who are going back for the second time in 12 months. They are quite satisfied that the decision they took the first time was right. That don't depend on the state, don't depend on the government, don't depend on your employers. The migrant problem, the worst of the migrant sections, is what we call footloose migrants. They don't have, these are India's most vulnerable workers. They have no, and on May Day, it's a damn good thing to remember them. Yeah. So the they have no, they don't have a clear idea on what the next destination is, let alone the final destination. They move from place to place, 30 days work here. Then the contractor says, my brother-in-law is building a bridge in Sangli. Go there. They get 45 days work there. The children of these migrants will never go to school. They are the hardcore underclass of illiteracy. Yeah. So the thing is, migrants in this country requires so much attention. Migrations require a hell of a lot of attention, but we are only willing to give that attention when it affects us.
Us.
And that's true of COVID itself in some ways.
And when it affects the urban middle class, because there's nobody to work in their houses, there's nobody to
Exactly.
get things for them. So before we move to the last question, I would also like to draw attention to the demands that the trade unions have raised for May Day. And it talks about how the public health infrastructure should be strengthened, how privatization, disinvestment should be stopped, 7,500 rupees transferred to all non-income tax paying families, 10 kg food per person for next 6 months, and most importantly, scrapping of the anti-farmer laws and electricity bill. So these are the demands that the trade unions have raised. But to conclude, Sainath, that on this May Day, what is the way forward? How do we strengthen these solidarities and how do we fight it out?
I think that they're already showing us the way. The charter of demands they're putting forward, they're very modest. And look, let's compare ourselves with good old capitalist countries, since we are, of course, India, the greatest emerging capitalist nation in the world, etc., etc. When the pandemic struck, hardcore capitalist countries in Europe, including Spain and Ireland, yeah, nationalized all health facilities. They, without batting an eyelid, without batting an eyelid, they nationalized all health facilities. Here, you have privatized all health facilities. Over the last 20 years of economic reforms, many government hospitals have been given over to private managements. And yet, what pathetic medical system, health system we have, it was the public side of it. Look at the government hospital Chennai, where the nurses are now being recognized with awards for having worked, getting COVID, coming back immediately working in the COVID ward. Whatever happened in those government hospitals. And in, it's always the example I give on the farmers' demands regarding uh, the APMC. The APMC is the government hospital of the agrarian sector. It has many flaws, it has many failures, but if you remove it, people will die. The APMC is the government school of the agrarian sector, and the government school is the APMC of the education sector. If you close that school, as you've seen, children, hunger goes up massively amongst children because the one decent meal they were getting, the midday meal, is no longer there. So I think that we needed to completely nationalize the health system. Second, I said in March last year, this is the time when we plan what was discussed in 1946 in the Bohr committee report, not Bore, he was an Englishman, not a Marathi, a Bohr committee report, which envisaged very much a system akin to the national health system of the United Kingdom. We started on that note, and within one or two plans, abandoned it and really allowed the private sector to milk the government, the public health system. We need that massive public health system. You really need that on a giant scale. Look at the fact that, I mean, the ten top healthcare billionaires make 5 billion rupees a day last year. They added to that. You desperately need to make health a, an enforceable fundamental right. That is
And
what you need.
and after adding that obscene amount to their revenue, a few crore donation is called as
Yeah.
a great gesture. Anyway, thanks a lot, Sainath, for this, and I would like to ask Vijay to come in and conclude this session. Vijay.
Yes, well, I'm going to read out a few sentences. We draw these three stupid laws, P. Sainath. This cruel, sadistic viciousness, P. Sainath. 50 minutes, Sainath, you've just taken the piss out of the whole discussion over the emergencies of our time. Sudanva began this by talking about gasping for socialism. You ended with the call, repeating the call from the health minister of Kerala, K.K. Shailja. She said to the press this week, if we were in government in Delhi, we would have nationalized healthcare entirely. Very straightforward talk from the government of Kerala. The result will come tomorrow. Let's see if this government of Kerala will continue to be the government of Kerala. Please go to our website, leftward.com. We have a banner, books available for sale, including Pranjal's terrific collection on the Farmers' Revolt. We have other books. I'm going to talk a little bit about my dear comrade Amit Sengupta's book later today. We have so many sessions coming up. The next session is a session with journalists talking about the farming crisis. That's the enduring theme of our day. We're going to come back with poems on workers' issues. We've got a panel on the COVID catastrophe in India, public health, vaccination. We've got the farmers' leaders talking to us. Then we're going to have rhythms of resistance, the music of the revolt. We're going to end with Acid Acid Democracy. I guess that name, enduring name, explains everything about India. Friends, if you do one thing, yes, please, Pranjal.
Before Vijay, just to add one more thing, not just the books, but all the viewers should go and also listen to the Halla Bol podcast.
Well, absolutely essential. Firstly, read Halla Bol, the book, which Nasruddin Shah says he was both informed and amused and enraged by. You must go get the book. Before I leave you, friends, I want you to go to your browsers, open newsclick.in, bookmark the page. It's the most important source for news on events in India and also around the world. NewsClick, which Pranjal is the editor of. Pranjal, congratulations. NewsClick has been doing such phenomenal reporting. It should be a matter of personal pride to you, to all of us associated with NewsClick. Incredible work. And I hope it will be bookmarked in browsers across the country. Also, while you're at your browser, go find the People's Archive of Rural India, a project masterminded by my mastermind, P. Sainath. Incredible stories, songs, glimpses into rural India, interviews. It's the humanity that's brought out on that website. It's the sheer humanity. It's people. It's not what Sainath says is the tenor of the Indian ruling class. Cruel, sadistic viciousness. That's the character, the contempt-filled ruling class in India. You get the exact opposite at the People's Archive of Rural India. You get the sheer humanity of people. Never forget that, friends. The sheer humanity of people, the migrants who walked home. Migrants who walked home might end up, yes, voting for the BJP, but that's not forever, friends. That is not forever. India is gasping for socialism. So is the world. So are we all. Thanks very much, Pranjal. Thank you so much, Sainath. Always great to see you. This was only 50 minutes. Let's do a 5-hour session soon. Thanks, friends. See you in a few minutes with a panel on journalism.